It's hard to determine, hard for me to determine what is my favorite season in the Christian year or the church year. It's hard not to be excited about Christmas. It's hard not to be moved and encouraged by the Easter season. But in terms of fellowship, this is the season. This is the season for me. And it's because so many of you are here. Those of you who dwell among the northern tribes, like the children of Israel leaving Egypt, you have migrated to these sandy shores. And unlike the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Jebusites and the Hittites, who greeted those children of Israel with animosity, we greet y'all with joy and thanksgiving, and so glad to have you. It's so good to see you. The friendships that we formed over the years, and it's just a blessing. Thank you again. I just wanted to give my special welcome to those who come and visit with us on a seasonal basis. You mean much to our church, and we appreciate your participation and your involvement. I want to express a word of thanks to Harriet Slaughter for assisting today, and also Kim Taylor. It's so good to have her on board assisting. Every Sunday there's going to be children's church now, and that's important to me. I like to fish. I don't think I'm very good at it, because in order to be good at it, you need to go a lot. I don't do that. I don't get to do that. Well, I say I guess I could if I, made more of an effort. But I guess I'm not dedicated. I like just about everything about fishing. I like the process. I like the equipment. I like where it takes you. I like to be exposed to God's beautiful outdoors, waterways, and what have you. And I love hearing fishermen talk about fishing. I love a good fish story. I heard more recently about these two friends who got up early on Sunday morning, launched their boat, out there fishing, just enjoying the morning, and in the distance they heard the church bells ring. One kind of dropped his head and shook it and said, we really ought to be in church. His friend said, you're right, but I couldn't have gone anyway. The wife's home sick in bed. That is dedication, friends. That's dedication to your sport. I may not be quite that dedicated, I guess. I still love to fish. And if I go fishing, I want to catch some fish. To me, that's a big part of it. Unlike Samuel Clemens, the famous Mark Twain, he too loved to go fishing. And he talked about it a good bit. And anytime he had an opportunity, he'd say, I'm going fishing. And off he'd go. But he wrote later in life and confided that he hated to catch fish. He said, I go fishing in order to relax. And if I catch a fish, it turns into work. I have to take care of the stinking thing. I have to clean it. So it gets in the way of my relaxation. And so Mark Twain would take his fishing pole and have a line and a bobber on it and go out there and sit on the creek bank or the river bank and throw that thing out there and just kick back. And he said, most people, when they see me fishing, leave me alone. And he said, I like that. It gives me a chance to relax. And what he never told anybody is that he didn't put a hook on the end. He could fish and fish and fish and never be bothered by fish or by man. That's not really fishing, is it? Not my book. And it's worlds apart from what Jesus when he told Peter and Andrew and James and John that he would make them fishers of men. Now, let's look at that passage again. I'm just going to read a couple of verses. Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Well, this morning, in these few moments, we're going to look at Jesus called these fishermen and the implications that are in this business of, as he said, fishing for men. Now, it's obvious that this passage, coupled with many others in the New Testament, convey the idea that Christ wants his disciples to be in the business of recruiting other disciples, recruiting others into the faith. We call that, in the Christian church, evangelism. It comes from a Greek word that simply means good news. To do the work of an evangelist is to share good news. What's the good news? Well, the good news is that God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. That's the story. And Jesus said to these men, "Follow me, and I will make you to become fishers of men." Here at the beginning of the gospel narrative in Mark's gospel, and all the way to the very end of the gospel narrative, over there in Matthew's gospel, where Jesus commanded, just before he ascended into heaven, he commanded his disciples and said, "Now go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you." And that's a tall order. Some have called this the Great Commission of Jesus, and others have said it is nothing less than the marching orders of the church. Now, there's no question that those who follow Jesus, those who are committed to the cause of Christ, have a story to tell. The point is, we're urged to tell it. And I want us to look at this just a little bit, because it sounds very serious, and it is. Some people make much of the fact that Jesus chose simple fishermen as his initial core of disciples. He's launching this outstanding task. He is coming claiming to be no less than God's Son, Redeemer, Messiah. And when he starts recruiting those who are going to carry out the mission inherent in that, where does he go? Well, he didn't go to the intellectual community. He didn't go to the scholastic community. He didn't go to the theological community. He didn't go to the temple, recruits the priests. He didn't go among the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, those religious castes, and recruit their best theological minds, those who were adept at understanding and going backwards and forwards what we currently call most of the Old Testament. He didn't approach those people. In order to carry out his mission to identify God to this world in a saving way, he approached fishermen, common laborers. Now, the truth of the matter is, we don't know a lot about their personal lives other than what we read in the Gospels. But we gather from that, and we know enough to know something about their lifestyle, that they had to be hard-working men who spent their time down there around the Sea of Galilee, fishing, as Kim pointed out to the youngsters, with nets. In that very primitive day, before any kind Interesting. We do know some other things about them. As we read further in the Gospels, we discover that they had some undesirable traits. Sometimes they were petulant. At times they were petulant. They exhibited some pride, the unsavory kind. They were selfish, self-centered. They were around Jesus for a few years, and yet, right on practically up at the end, they showed very little spiritual perception about what he was really all about. And then right at the end of his time with them, they proved to be pretty cowardly. These are the men that Jesus selected to be that core of disciples. Isn't that interesting? Interesting. Of course, someone like me, that spells good news also. It says to me that we have to conclude that God is not bound by who we are. And Jesus looked upon these men, knowing who they were and what they were, but he also saw what they could and would become. In fact, that's what he told them. He said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." They weren't already fishers of men, they were fishers of fish. That's it. I will make you fish for people. Well, what we're talking about here is really the business of influencing others in very large ways. Jesus said first to them, basically, "Let me influence you. And then I will enable you to influence others." Notice the sequence. It's very critical. Follow me. That's a prerequisite. That's a prerequisite to learn to do this kind of fishing. Following Jesus. How do we do it? Well, the key, as I said, is this business of following Jesus. And if we will look through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, for instance, these are the primary texts that tell us about the daily life and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay? When you read these 4 books, you get a pretty good picture of the activity and the way Jesus carried out his own personal life and living. And it's so interesting to note that at one count that I made, maybe off 1 or 2, but the Gospels record that Jesus had, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he had 132 encounters with people. You just take all those instances that are spelled out in those Gospels, and you'll find about 132 encounters that he had, sometimes with an individual, one-on-one, other times with groups of people, sometimes with a crowd of people. 132 instances annotated in the Gospels. 6 of them occurred in the temple. 4 of them occurred in the synagogue, religious settings. The rest occurred in the streets, in the marketplace, in the homes, where real people lived out their real lives 24/7. Just life, where people are, doing what people do, dealing with what people deal with. That's where Jesus of Nazareth spent most of his time. Based on what we read in the Gospels, it seems that this was where he spent the vast majority of his time, effort, and energy. It wasn't in a religious setting. It was where people were living day by day, dealing with what people have to deal with. People that, baseline, although so much has happened technologically in so many ways in our world, people at baseline who are pretty much dealing with the same kind of issues you and I deal with every day of Studies have shown that people who don't regularly attend church, who rarely, if ever, go. Some studies were made a few years ago that I took note of. And the thing that surfaced in those studies was that when asked about why they didn't go or involved in their church attendance, the one thing that kept coming up to the surface, a large percentage, was that these people said that they didn't want to go by themselves. They didn't want to go alone. And the interesting thing about those studies was that in that same questionnaire and interview process, those same people, 90% of them said, yes, I would like to know more about the Bible. And you might say, well, they don't come to Sunday school. Yeah, but they've already said, I don't want to go by themselves. Which says what to me? It has to do with relationships. It has to do with influencing people. How are you going to fish for people if you don't get to know them? How are you going to influence people in a God direction if you're not related to them? The point is that when you relate in a healthy, positive way, you're in a position then to maybe urge that person in various ways toward a life of encounter with God, an involvement in His church, relationships. There's really no substitute for personal relationships when it comes to influencing people. Now, I spent most of my life primarily, seen as and functioning as a preacher who stands behind an lectern or a pulpit like I'm doing right now and telling you what the book says and sometimes what I think and hoping to thereby influence people. But I know as well, or maybe better than a lot of people, that's not the best way to do it. Now, I'm not knocking the business of preaching the gospel. I happen to believe in it pretty strongly. But I'm simply saying that there is no substitute for relational, what some of the church have called relational evangelism. That is to say, getting to know people and influencing them on many levels of that knowledge and that relationship. It is also obvious that we may influence others by our actions. Jesus said, let your light so shine before men that they in turn to glorify your Father in heaven. We all know that, particularly even in this day and age, that there's a bit of a bad rap attached to a lot of organized religion. A lot of Christian religion has come under a blanket of a negative response and publicity, and some of it, I believe, for very good reason. That there are some branches of God's family that have majored on negativism. We don't believe in this, we don't believe in that, and we think this is wrong, and we think this is bad, this is an abomination. And if you're participating, you're wrong too. Well, guess what? It's not very attractive to a person who stands outside of a spiritual experience. In fact, it's a wall. It's a wall and it's a slab. And there's a better way. There's a better way. Jesus told those early disciples, follow me. And in the process of following him, they were exposed to the way he dealt with people. And after the crucifixion and he was resurrected, it was as though, okay, we get it. We get it. And that handful of men, they looked so poor to begin with, so lacking in promise, turned the known world on its ear for God in a lifetime. They reached out to what was known as the civilized world in their lifetime with the gospel of Jesus. Last Sunday, our church met an annual conference, and we adopted a budget, looked at the budget, analyzed the budget for the coming year. And some discussion centered around what our church designates for outreach. It's a good discussion. It's an appropriate place to center our concerns. The significance to me is found in the fact that in this particular church at St. Andrew by the Sea, we reach out to touch lives through a multifaceted approach of embracing and supporting the work of those right here in our own community and surrounding area who are diligently reaching out to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to invest in the welfare of children. If you analyze what we're doing and calling it outreach, it is reaching out with activity and action, putting our money where our mouth is, to touch lives in a positive, actual life experience way. We call it that outreach. And it is. It is. St. Francis said, we are to preach the gospel at all times, everywhere. And if necessary, we're to use words.